The widow stood in the dusty street of South Pass City, Wyoming, her black mourning dress a stark contrast against the sun-bleached buildings. And when she opened her mouth to ask for directions to the mercantile, only Polish words tumbled out, leaving the townspeople staring at her like she was something strange and unwelcome. Zafia Dabrowski had arrived in America 3 months earlier with her husband Peter, filled with hope for a new life in the Wyoming territory. They had traveled from Krakow with dreams of buying land and raising cattle, far from the poverty that had plagued their families for generations. But fate had been cruel. A simple fever had taken Peter within weeks of their arrival, leaving Zafia alone in a country where she could not speak the language, widowed at 22 years old with nothing but a small trunk of belongings, and the few dollars her husband had managed to save before his death. The boarding house where she had taken a room was run by a German couple who could understand a few words of her native tongue, enough for basic communication, but not enough for real conversation. Zafia spent her days cleaning rooms in exchange for lodging, working in silence, her face a mask of composure even as grief threatened to overwhelm her. She had not laughed since Peter died. She was not sure she remembered how. That afternoon in late August of 1872, she stood outside the general store, trying to remember the English words she had practiced. Her dark hair was pulled back severely under her black bonnet, and her hazel eyes were red-rimmed from lack of sleep. She clutched her small coin purse and gathered her courage to enter the store, knowing the shopkeeper would grow impatient with her halting attempts at communication. Adam Donovan was leaning against the hitching post outside the saloon when he first saw her. He was 26 years old, lean and weathered from years of working cattle drives and odd jobs across the territory. His dark blonde hair was shaggy beneath his worn hat, and his blue eyes were sharp from constantly watching the horizon. He had just finished delivering a herd to the mining operations nearby and was planning to spend a few days in town before heading back to the ranch where he worked seasonally. He watched the woman in black struggle with the door of the mercantile, her hands shaking slightly. When she finally entered, he could hear raised voices almost immediately. Curiosity got the better of him, and he pushed off from the post and wandered over. Inside, the shopkeeper was gesturing wildly while the widow stood frozen, tears streaming down her face as she tried to explain what she needed. The words coming from her mouth were completely foreign to Adam, flowing and complex, unlike anything he had heard before. "I cannot help you if you cannot speak proper English," the shopkeeper was saying, his voice loud and exasperated. "This is America. You need to learn the language." Zafia's hands trembled as she held out a piece of paper with items written in Polish. The shopkeeper barely glanced at it before shaking his head. Adam stepped forward without thinking. "Let me see that paper, madam." Zafia turned to him, her eyes wide and frightened. She handed him the paper, though of course he could not read the words either. But he looked at the shopkeeper with a steady gaze that made the man step back slightly. "She is trying to buy supplies," Adam said evenly. "Why don't you show her around the store and let her point to what she needs?" The shopkeeper grumbled but agreed, clearly wanting to be done with the whole situation. For the next 20 minutes, Adam watched as Zafia pointed to flour, salt, thread, and other basic necessities. He noticed how carefully she counted out her coins, how she put back items when she realized she did not have enough money. Without drawing attention to it, Adam added a few coins to her pile when she was not looking, making sure she could afford everything on her list. When the transaction was complete, Zafia gathered her packages and turned to Adam. She spoke in Polish, words he could not understand but whose meaning he could guess from her tone. She was thanking him. "You are welcome, madam," he said gently, tipping his hat. You new to South Pass City?" She looked at him blankly, not understanding. He tried simpler words, speaking more slowly. "You live here." Recognition flickered in her eyes. She nodded, then gestured vaguely in the direction of the boarding house. Adam found himself wanting to help her, though he could not explain why. There was something about the profound sadness in her eyes that struck him deeply. He had seen plenty of hardship in his years out west, but this woman seemed utterly lost, adrift in a place where she could not even ask for help. Over the next few days, Adam found excuses to stay in town. He told himself he was just taking a longer break than usual, that he deserved some rest after the hard drive. But the truth was, he kept hoping to see the widow again. When he finally spotted her carrying laundry from the boarding house, he approached carefully, not wanting to startle her. "Morning, madam," he said, tipping his hat. Zafia looked up, recognizing him. A flicker of something that might have been relief crossed her face, but she said nothing, just nodded in acknowledgement. Adam gestured to the heavy basket. "Can I help you carry that?" She did not understand the words, but his gesture was clear. For a moment, she hesitated, then nodded and allowed him to take the basket. They walked together in silence to the creek where women did their washing. Other townswomen were already there, chatting among themselves. They grew quiet when Zafia approached, watching her with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. Adam set down the basket and tipped his hat to Zafia again before leaving. He could feel the other women's eyes on him, could imagine what they were thinking about a cowboy helping the foreign widow. But he found he did not much care what they thought. That evening, he sat in the saloon nursing a whiskey when the idea came to him. If the widow could not speak English, and nobody in town seemed willing or able to speak her language, then maybe someone needed to learn it. The thought was so simple and so absurd that he almost laughed out loud. He had barely made it through the minimal schooling available on the frontier. The idea of learning a whole foreign language seemed impossible. But then he remembered the look in her eyes, that hollow sadness, and he thought about how it must feel to be completely cut off from the world around you, unable to express yourself or understand others. He had been lonely plenty of times in his life, but he had always had his words. The next morning, Adam went to the boarding house and knocked on the door. The German landlady answered, eyeing him suspiciously. "I would like to speak with Mrs." He realized he did not even know the widow's name. "Dabrowski," the landlady supplied. "She is working." "I will wait," Adam said firmly. The landlady left him standing on the porch. 10 minutes later, Zafia appeared, wiping her hands on her apron. Up close, Adam could see she was younger than he had first thought, probably only in her early 20s. Her dark hair escaped in small wisps from beneath her kerchief, and despite the exhaustion evident in her face, there was a certain grace in the way she moved. Adam took off his hat, suddenly feeling foolish. "Madam, I know you cannot understand me, but I want to help you. I want to learn your language." Zafia stared at him, confusion clear on her face. Adam tried again, speaking more slowly, using gestures. He pointed to himself, then to her, then made talking motions with his hand. Understanding dawned slowly. Zafia shook her head, speaking rapidly in Polish. Adam caught one word repeated several times that sounded like "nie" and guessed it meant no. She was refusing. "Please," he said. "I have time. I have nothing but time right now." She kept shaking her head, but Adam saw something in her eyes that looked like longing. She wanted this, he realized. She wanted someone to talk to so badly it hurt. He tried a different approach. He pointed to himself and said clearly, "Adam." Zafia blinked. Then very quietly she pointed to herself and said, "Zafia." Adam smiled. "Zafia, that is a beautiful name." She did not understand his words, but something in his tone made her lips tremble slightly, as if she was fighting back emotion. She spoke in Polish again, softer this time, and though Adam had no idea what she said, he heard the resignation in her voice. She was agreeing. They arranged to meet the following afternoon when Zafia had a few hours free from her work. Adam spent that night worrying he had bitten off more than he could chew, but he was not one to back down from a challenge once he had committed to it. The next day, they met at a quiet spot near the creek, away from prying eyes and gossiping tongues. Zafia had brought a small notebook and a pencil, and she seemed to have thought about how to approach this impossible task. She started with simple words, pointing to objects and saying them in Polish. Drzewo, tree. Woda, water. Niebo, sky. Adam repeated them carefully, stumbling over the unfamiliar sounds. The language felt strange in his mouth, full of consonants that bunched together in ways English never did. But Zafia was patient, correcting his pronunciation gently, and slowly he began to piece together a handful of words. At the end of that first lesson, Adam knew perhaps 20 words of Polish, and he could tell Zafia was impressed despite herself. As they parted ways, he said in careful, heavily accented Polish, "Dziękuję." Thank you. Zafia's eyes widened. Then, for just a moment, the corner of her mouth lifted in what might have been the ghost of a smile. Over the following weeks, they met nearly every day. Adam delayed his return to the ranch, sending word that he had personal business to attend to. His boss was not happy, but Adam had always been a reliable worker, so the man grudgingly gave him more time. The lessons expanded beyond simple vocabulary. Zafia taught him basic phrases, how to conjugate verbs, the complex grammar that made Polish so challenging. She wrote things down in her careful handwriting, and Adam studied them in the evenings by lamplight in his rented room, whispering the words to himself, until they started to feel more natural. In turn, he tried to teach her English, though she seemed less interested in learning it. He realized that her resistance to English was not about ability, but about pain. English was the language of the country that had taken her husband, the language of the people who looked at her with suspicion and dismissed her as a foreigner. Polish was her link to who she had been, to the life she had lost. As the weeks passed, they began to talk about more than just vocabulary. Zafia told him in simple Polish phrases he could now understand about her life in Krakow. She had grown up in a small village, the daughter of a baker. Peter had been a farmer's son. They had married when she was 19, hoping to make a better life. America had seemed like a dream, a place where hard work could lead to prosperity. But dreams can die, she said quietly in Polish one afternoon as they sat by the creek. Dreams die very easily. Adam's Polish was still rough, but he could understand her now when she spoke slowly. Not all dreams, he replied in her language. Some dreams are stubborn. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and something shifted between them. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but Adam felt it like a change in the wind. He told her about his own life, struggling with the Polish words but determined to communicate in her language as much as possible. He had grown up in Missouri, the son of a farmer who drank too much and died when Adam was 14. His mother had passed 2 years later from pneumonia. He had been on his own since then, working his way west, taking whatever jobs he could find. He had herded cattle, mined for gold, worked as a ranch hand, even spent a winter as a guard for a freight company. "No family?" Zafia asked, her Polish accent making the words sound more poignant somehow. "No," Adam admitted. "Just me. Lonely," she said, and it was not a question. "Yes," he agreed. "Lonely." They sat in companionable silence, watching the creek flow past. It was early October now, and the aspens on the hillsides were turning gold. The air had a crisp edge that promised winter was not far off. "Your Polish is getting better," Zafia said finally. "I have a good teacher," Adam replied, and he was rewarded with that ghost of a smile again. As autumn deepened, something began to change in Zafia. She still wore black, still carried the weight of grief, but there was a lightness that had not been there before. She looked forward to their meetings. Adam could tell. She started to share more personal memories, talking about her childhood, her dreams, the things she had loved about Poland and the things she had been happy to leave behind. One afternoon in late October, she told him a story about her grandfather, who had been something of a local character in her village. He had raised geese and was convinced they were smarter than most people. He would talk to them as if they were human, consulting them on village matters and nodding sagely at their honking responses. Adam laughed at the image, and then Zafia laughed too. It was the first time he had heard her laugh, and the sound was like sunlight breaking through clouds. It transformed her face, making her look years younger, reminding him that grief had not always defined her. The laughter faded, and Zafia's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with something like shock. She had not laughed since Peter died, Adam realized. She had not let herself. "It is okay," Adam said gently in Polish. "It is okay to laugh. It is okay to be happy." Tears filled her eyes, but she nodded. They sat together until the tears passed, and Adam had the overwhelming urge to put his arm around her but did not, knowing it was too soon, knowing she was not ready. But something had shifted again, something significant. Zafia was beginning to emerge from the cocoon of grief she had wrapped around herself. By November, Adam's Polish was good enough for real conversations. He still made mistakes, still struggled with the more complex aspects of grammar, but he could express himself and understand most of what Zafia said. The people of South Pass City had grown accustomed to seeing them together, and while there was still gossip, it was more curious than malicious now. One cold morning, Adam arrived for their meeting to find Zafia shivering in her thin black shawl. Winter was coming early, and she clearly did not have adequate clothing for Wyoming winters. "You need a warmer coat," he said in Polish. She shook her head. "I have no money for a coat." "Then I will buy you one," Adam said firmly. Zafia's eyes flashed. "I am not a charity case, Adam Donovan." It was the first time she had said his full name, and hearing it in her accented Polish made his heart do something strange in his chest. "It is not charity," he said. "It is being practical. You cannot work if you freeze to death." They argued about it for 10 minutes, their first real argument, until finally Adam said, "Then consider it a loan. You can pay me back when you can." Zafia studied him for a long moment, then nodded curtly. They went to the mercantile together, and Adam bought her a heavy wool coat lined with fleece. When she put it on, her eyes closed briefly in relief at the warmth. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You are welcome," he replied, and meant it more deeply than the simple words conveyed. That evening, as Adam sat in the saloon, the ranch foreman found him. The man had ridden into town specifically to talk to him. "Boss is getting impatient," the foreman said without preamble. "You have been in town for 2 months now. Either you come back to work, or we are hiring someone else for your position." Adam looked into his whiskey glass, weighing his options. He needed the work, needed the money. Winter jobs were hard to come by, and the ranch position was steady. But the thought of leaving South Pass City, of leaving Zafia, made his chest tighten. "I will be back in 3 days," Adam said finally. "Tell the boss I am sorry for the delay, but I will be there." The foreman nodded and left, and Adam sat alone with his thoughts. He knew what was happening, even if he had been avoiding putting a name to it. He was falling in love with Zafia Dabrowski. Maybe he had been since that first day in the mercantile when he had seen her crying. Maybe it had happened more gradually during their lessons by the creek. But the feeling was undeniable now, a constant ache in his chest when he was away from her, a fierce desire to protect her and make her happy. The question was, did she feel anything for him beyond gratitude? The next afternoon, Adam told Zafia that he had to leave for work. They were sitting by the creek, though the weather was now too cold for comfort and they would soon need to find a different meeting place. "For how long?" Zafia asked, and Adam thought he heard disappointment in her voice. "The winter," Adam said. "I work at a ranch about 40 miles from here. But I will come back when I can, and I will be here again in the spring." Zafia was quiet for a long moment, staring at the water. "I will miss our lessons," she said finally. "Just the lessons?" Adam asked, the question out before he could stop himself. Zafia turned to look at him, and something vulnerable flickered in her eyes. "No," she admitted quietly, "not just the lessons." Adam's heart raced. "Zafia, I need to tell you something. My Polish is not perfect, so I hope I can say this right." He took a breath. "I care about you. More than I should, maybe. More than is wise, considering you are still in mourning, but I cannot leave without telling you." Zafia's eyes filled with tears. "Adam," she whispered. "You do not have to say anything," Adam continued. "I know it is too soon. I know you are still grieving your husband. But I want you to know that I will come back. I will always come back if you want me to." A tear slipped down Zafia's cheek. She spoke in Polish, her words tumbling out in a rush. "I feel guilty," she said. "I loved Peter. I married him. We had dreams together. But he is gone and I am still here, and when I am with you, I feel alive again. Is that wrong? Is it wrong to feel happy when he is dead?" Adam reached out and gently took her hand. It was the first time they had truly touched beyond accidental brushes, and the contact sent electricity through his whole body. "It is not wrong," he said firmly. "Peter would not want you to stop living. He would want you to be happy." "How do you know?" Zafia asked, her voice breaking. "Because if I loved someone, that is what I would want for them," Adam said simply. They sat there by the frozen creek, hands clasped, until the sun began to set and the cold became too much to bear. When they finally stood to leave, Zafia did not let go of his hand immediately. She held on for just a moment longer, and that moment told Adam everything he needed to know. He left for the ranch the next day, but before he went, he stopped by the boarding house. Zafia came out to meet him, wrapped in the coat he had bought her. "I will be back," Adam promised in Polish. "Wait for me." "I will wait," Zafia said, and then, rising on her toes, she kissed his cheek quickly. It was brief and chaste, but it sealed the promise between them. The winter was the longest of Adam's life. He worked hard at the ranch, saving every penny he could. In the evenings, he continued to study Polish from the notes Zafia had written for him, determined to improve even in her absence. He also began to practice writing in Polish, laboriously crafting letters to her. Zafia received his first letter in mid-December. Her hands shook as she opened it, and she had to sit down as she read his careful Polish script. He told her about the ranch, about the cattle, about the other cowboys he worked with. But mostly he told her that he missed her, that he thought about her every day, that he was counting the days until spring. She wrote back immediately, her letter filled with news of South Pass City and the small details of her daily life. She told him that she was still working at the boarding house, but the landlady had started paying her a small wage now instead of just room and board. She told him about the snow that had fallen, about the bitter cold, about how she wore the coat he had given her every day and thought of him when she did. They wrote to each other throughout the winter, their letters becoming more intimate and personal with each exchange. Zafia wrote about her fears for the future, her worries about money and survival. Adam wrote about his dreams of having his own land someday, of building something permanent instead of always drifting. In one letter, Zafia wrote, "I have been thinking about what you said by the creek. You were right. Peter would want me to be happy. I have been talking to him in my mind, telling him about you. I think he would have liked you. I think he would approve." Adam carried that letter folded in his shirt pocket for the rest of the winter, taking it out to reread whenever he needed encouragement. In February, a massive blizzard hit the territory. For 3 days, the world was nothing but howling wind and blinding snow. Adam and the other ranch hands huddled in the bunkhouse, venturing out only to tend to the cattle and horses. When the storm finally cleared, the landscape was transformed, buried under several feet of snow. Adam's first thought was of Zafia. Was she safe? Did the boarding house have enough food and fuel? He nearly went crazy with worry until the mail could get through again, and he received a letter from her assuring him she was fine. "The storm was frightening," she wrote, "but we were well prepared. The German couple who run the boarding house are very practical people, but I thought of you often during those long days and nights. I hoped you were safe and warm. Please be careful, Adam. You have become very precious to me." Those last words sustained him through the rest of the long winter. Spring finally came in late March, melting the snow and turning the ground to mud. Adam could barely contain his impatience to return to South Pass City. The moment the boss said the winter work was done, Adam collected his pay and saddled his horse. He rode into South Pass City on a bright April morning, his heart pounding with anticipation. He went straight to the boarding house, not even stopping to wash the trail dust from his face. Zafia was hanging laundry in the yard when he arrived. She turned at the sound of his horse, and for a moment, she just stared at him as if she could not believe he was real. Then she dropped the sheet she was holding and ran to him. Adam dismounted in a rush, and then Zafia was in his arms and he was holding her tight, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the reality of her against him after months of absence. "You came back," she said in Polish, her voice muffled against his shoulder. "I promised I would," Adam replied in the same language. They pulled back just enough to look at each other. Zafia's face had filled out a little over the winter, the gauntness of grief fading. Her eyes were brighter, more alive. She was still wearing black, but there was color in her cheeks and a smile on her lips. "I missed you," Zafia said. "I missed you too," Adam said. "So much." And then, because he could not help himself any longer, he kissed her. It was a real kiss this time, not a chaste brush on the cheek, but a full kiss that communicated everything he had been feeling for months. Zafia kissed him back with equal fervor, her hands gripping the front of his shirt as if to convince herself he was truly there. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Zafia laughed. It was that same wonderful sound Adam had first heard the previous autumn, but richer now, fuller, unrestrained by guilt or grief. "I love you," Adam said in Polish, the words clear and certain. "I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a few months, but I love you, Zafia. I want to build a life with you." Zafia's eyes shone with tears, but they were happy tears this time. "I love you too," she said. "I think I have loved you since you first tried to speak Polish to me." "You looked so determined and so terrible at it," Adam laughed. "I have gotten better." "Much better," Zafia agreed, smiling. "Your accent is still bad, but I can understand everything you say now." They spent the rest of that day together, talking and walking through the town. Adam told her about his plans. He had saved most of his winter wages, and combined with what he had put away before, he had enough to file a homestead claim. There was land available not far from South Pass City, good land with water access. "I want to build a ranch," he told her. "Nothing huge, but enough to support a family, enough to make a real home." "A family?" Zafia asked softly. Adam stopped walking and turned to face her fully. "Marry me, Zafia. I know it is soon. I know people will talk about you remarrying so quickly, but I do not care what they think. I only care about you. Marry me and we will build something together, something that is ours." Zafia was quiet for a moment and Adam's heart sank, thinking she was going to refuse. But then she said, "Peter and I were married in a Catholic church in Krakow. There is no Catholic church here." "How would we marry?" Relief flooded through Adam. "There is a Methodist minister in town, or we can ride to another town if you prefer. Whatever you want, Zafia." "The Methodist minister is fine," Zafia said. "I do not think Peter would mind. He was never very concerned with such details." She paused, then added, "But I want to wait a little while. Not long, but a little while. I need to feel like I am marrying you because I choose you, not because I am desperate or afraid. Do you understand?" "I understand," Adam said, though part of him wanted to rush to the minister immediately. "How long?" "The summer," Zafia said. "Let us court properly through the summer. In the fall we can marry." Adam nodded, agreeing even though 6 months felt like an eternity, but he knew she was right. They needed time to be sure, time for Zafia to transition from widow to wife without feeling like she was betraying Peter's memory. They spent the spring and summer together, and it was the happiest time of either of their lives. Adam found work at a local ranch that allowed him to stay near town, and every evening he would come to see Zafia. They would walk together, talk in Polish, share meals when Zafia's work schedule allowed. Zafia slowly began to integrate more into the community. With Adam's encouragement, she started learning English more seriously. Her accent would always be thick, but she could communicate now, could ask for things at the store without his help, could exchange pleasantries with neighbors. Some people in town were judgmental about how quickly she was moving on from her husband's death, but most were simply happy to see her coming back to life. The German landlady, who had grown fond of Zafia over the winter, was particularly supportive. "Love is not something to waste when you find it," the landlady told Zafia in German, which Zafia could understand better than English. "Especially out here, where life is so uncertain. If you love that cowboy and he loves you, grab onto that with both hands." In June, Adam filed his homestead claim on 160 acres of good grazing land with a creek running through it. He started building a house, working every spare moment he had. Zafia would come to watch on her days off, and eventually she started helping, handing him tools and learning to mix mortar. The house was small but sturdy, built to last through harsh Wyoming winters. Adam constructed it with care, thinking about the future, about children who would run through its rooms, about growing old with Zafia within its walls. By late August, the house was finished. It was simple, just 3 rooms and a loft, but it had glass windows and a stone fireplace and a solid roof. Adam stood back and looked at it with pride. "What do you think?" he asked Zafia in Polish. She walked through the empty rooms, her footsteps echoing on the wooden floors. When she came back outside, there were tears on her cheeks. "It is perfect," she said. "It is home." They set the wedding date for the first week of October, exactly 1 year after Zafia had first laughed at the story of her grandfather and his geese. Zafia had put aside her black mourning clothes in late summer, transitioning to gray and then finally to colors again. For her wedding, she made herself a simple blue dress, using the sewing skills her mother had taught her as a girl. The ceremony was small, held in the Methodist church with just a handful of witnesses. The German landlady and her husband came, along with a few of the other cowboys Adam had worked with, and some of the townswomen who had become friendly with Zafia. The minister conducted the service in English, but Adam had arranged something special. When it came time for the vows, he recited his in both English and Polish, wanting to speak to Zafia in the language that had brought them together. "I promise to love you and protect you," he said in careful Polish. "I promise to work hard to give you a good life. I promise to make you laugh as often as I can. I promise to always speak your language so you never feel alone again." Zafia was crying openly by the time he finished, and when it was her turn, she spoke her vows in Polish first and then repeated them haltingly in English, wanting to honor Adam's language as he had honored hers. "I promise to love you with all my heart," she said. "I promise to be your partner and your friend. I promise to build a life with you, to work beside you, to be brave with you. I promise to teach our children both languages, so they know where they come from and who they are." The mention of children made Adam's heart swell with joy and anticipation. The minister pronounced them husband and wife, and Adam kissed Zafia as his wife for the first time. The small gathering moved to the boarding house for a simple celebration. The landlady had prepared food, and someone had brought a fiddle. It was not elaborate, but it was filled with warmth and genuine happiness. As the sun set, Adam and Zafia left for their new home. They rode together on Adam's horse, Zafia sitting in front of him, his arms around her waist. The evening was cool but not cold, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink. When they reached the house, Adam dismounted and helped Zafia down. Then, in a gesture that made her laugh, he swept her up in his arms and carried her across the threshold. Inside, he had prepared a surprise. He had bought a real bed frame and mattress, a luxury they had not been able to afford before. There were sheets and quilts, candles for light, and he had even picked wildflowers and put them in a jar on the small table. Zafia looked around their home, their first real home together, and felt a wave of emotion so strong it almost knocked her over. A year ago, she had been drowning in grief, unable to speak to anyone, unable to imagine a future. Now she stood in her own house with a husband who loved her so much he had learned her language just to hear her laugh. "Thank you," she said softly in Polish. "For what?" Adam asked, setting down the bag they had brought with Zafia's belongings. "For not giving up on me," Zafia said. "For seeing me when I felt invisible, for making me believe I could be happy again." Adam crossed to her and took her hands. "You saved me too," he said. "I was just drifting before I met you, no purpose, no direction. You gave me a reason to build something, to stay in one place, to plan for a future. We saved each other." That night, as they lay together in their new bed, Zafia felt truly at peace for the first time since Peter's death. She still loved Peter, would always carry him in her heart, but she had learned that the heart was more expansive than she had known. There was room for old love and new love, for grief and joy, for the past and the future. The first year of their marriage was not easy. Building a ranch from nothing was backbreaking work. They acquired a small herd of cattle with the last of their savings, and Adam worked dawn to dusk to care for them, build fences, and improve the property. Zafia worked alongside him, learning about ranching despite having grown up in a city. She also kept their home, cooked their meals, and tended a large garden that helped supplement their food supplies. Her strength surprised both of them. She was tougher than she looked, able to work long hours without complaint. That first winter in their own home was harsh. The wind howled around their little house, and snow piled up against the walls. But inside they were warm and happy. In the evenings they would sit by the fire and talk, sometimes in Polish, sometimes in English, often in a mixture of both. Adam's Polish was now fluent, though his accent still made Zafia smile. Her English had improved dramatically, though she preferred Polish for intimate conversations. In February, Zafia realized she was pregnant. She was nervous to tell Adam, worried about bringing a child into their still uncertain situation, but when she finally spoke the words, his face lit up with such pure joy that her fears melted away. "A baby," he breathed, pulling her into his arms. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Zafia asked. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Adam said. "I am beyond happy. I am complete." They prepared for the baby throughout the spring and summer. Adam built a cradle from wood he carved and sanded smooth. Zafia sewed tiny clothes and blankets. The German landlady from the boarding house, who had become a good friend, gave them advice and promised to help with the birth. In late September of 1873, 2 years after Zafia had first arrived in South Pass City, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy. The labor was long and difficult, but when the baby finally arrived, crying lustily and waving his tiny fists, Zafia felt her heart expand impossibly further. They named him Peter Adam, honoring both Zafia's first husband and her second. Adam held his son with tears streaming down his face, overwhelmed by the weight of responsibility and love. "Hello, little one," he said softly in Polish. "Welcome to the world. Your mother and I are going to make sure you have a good life." Zafia watched her husband cradle their son and felt a completeness she had never imagined possible. This was her family now, her future, the life she had built from the ashes of loss. The years that followed were full of hard work, but also profound contentment. The ranch grew slowly but steadily. Adam acquired more cattle, built more structures, improved their land. Zafia proved to be an excellent ranch wife, capable and resilient. Young Peter was a cheerful, energetic child who grew up speaking both Polish and English fluently, switching between them with ease. When he was 2 years old, Zafia gave birth to a daughter they named Marta, after Zafia's mother. 2 years after that, another daughter arrived, Helena. The house that had once seemed spacious now felt crowded, so Adam built an addition, expanding it to accommodate their growing family. The original 3 rooms became 6, with a proper loft bedroom for the children. The ranch prospered, not to the point of wealth but to the point of security. They would never be rich, but they had enough. They had cattle, horses, a good house, food on the table, and love in abundance. As the children grew, Adam and Zafia made sure they understood their heritage. They told them stories of Krakow, of Peter's bravery in bringing Zafia to America, of Adam's determination to learn Polish. The children grew up bilingual and bicultural, proud of both sides of their identity. South Pass City changed over the years. The mining boom that had brought prosperity began to fade, and some families left for opportunities elsewhere. But Adam and Zafia stayed. This was their home, the place where they had found each other and built their life. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Adam surprised Zafia by taking her back to the creek where they had first conducted their Polish lessons. It was autumn again, the aspens golden on the hillsides, the air crisp and clean. "You remember?" Adam asked in Polish. "Of course I remember," Zafia said, smiling. "I remember thinking you were crazy to try to learn Polish just to talk to me. Best decision I ever made," Adam said. "Well, second best. The best was asking you to marry me." Zafia leaned against him, comfortable and content. "I never thought I would be happy again after Peter died. I thought my life was over." "But it was just beginning," Adam said. "Yes," Zafia agreed. "It was just beginning." They stood there by the creek, wrapped in each other's arms, watching the water flow past as it always had and always would. The years continued to pass. Young Peter grew into a capable young man who loved ranching as much as his father did. Marta was clever and bookish, always reading whatever material she could find. Helena was spirited and adventurous, constantly climbing trees and chasing after her older siblings. When young Peter turned 18 in 1891, Adam began to gradually turn over more of the ranch operations to him. Adam was 45 years old now, his hair graying at the temples, his hands weathered from decades of hard work. But he was happy and healthy, and he still woke up every morning grateful for the life he had built. Zafia was 43, still beautiful despite the lines that time and hard work had etched on her face. Her dark hair was streaked with silver now, but her eyes were still bright, and she still laughed frequently, especially when Adam told terrible jokes in mangled Polish just to make her smile. That summer, young Peter announced he was planning to marry a girl from a neighboring ranch. Adam and Zafia gave their blessing gladly, thrilled to see their son embarking on his own journey of building a life and family. The wedding was held at the ranch, a much larger affair than Adam and Zafia's simple ceremony had been. Friends and neighbors came from all over the territory. There was food and music and dancing that lasted until late into the night. As Adam danced with Zafia under the stars, he reflected on how far they had come. From that first day in the mercantile when she had stood crying and alone, unable to communicate with anyone around her, to this moment when she was surrounded by family and friends, secure and loved and happy. "What are you thinking about?" Zafia asked in Polish. Even after all these years, Polish was still the language they used for their most intimate conversations. "About how lucky I am," Adam said. "About how different my life would be if I had just walked past that mercantile instead of going inside." "Fate," Zafia said. "It was fate that brought you to me." "Or stubbornness," Adam said with a grin. "Stubborn enough to learn Polish just to hear you laugh." Zafia laughed at that, the same wonderful sound that had captivated him so many years ago. "And I am stubborn enough to have married a crazy cowboy who thought learning Polish was a good use of his time." "Best use of my time," Adam corrected, pulling her closer. "The very best." As the years moved into the new century, the ranch continued to thrive. Young Peter and his wife had children of their own, giving Adam and Zafia grandchildren to dote on. Marta moved to Cheyenne to become a teacher, while Helena married a cowboy who worked on a ranch near Laramie. Adam and Zafia settled into the comfortable rhythm of older age. They still worked, though not as hard as before, and they spent more time simply enjoying each other's company. They would sit on the porch in the evenings, watching the sunset over their land, talking in Polish about the day's events and their memories of years past. When Adam was 58 years old, he had a scare with his heart. The doctor from South Pass City rode out to examine him and prescribed rest. For a few weeks, Zafia fretted and worried, afraid of losing him after so many good years together. But Adam recovered, stubborn as ever, and though he took on less physical work, he remained active and engaged. He spent more time teaching his grandsons about ranching, passing on the knowledge he had accumulated over decades. Zafia remained healthy and strong, her constitution seemingly unbreakable. She still tended her garden, still cooked elaborate meals for the family gatherings that happened regularly now with 3 married children and a growing collection of grandchildren. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their children organized a large celebration. Family and friends came from across Wyoming to mark the occasion. There were speeches and toasts, laughter and tears of joy. When it was Adam's turn to speak, he stood up and pulled Zafia to her feet beside him. He spoke in Polish first, then translated to English for those who did not understand. 30 years ago, I met a woman who could not speak my language and I could not speak hers. But I learned. I learned because I saw something in her that I could not let pass by. I saw strength and beauty and a spirit that refused to be broken by grief and hardship. Learning Polish was the smartest thing I ever did because it opened the door to the greatest love of my life. He turned to Zafia, taking both her hands. You have given me a life beyond anything I dreamed possible. You have given me children and grandchildren, a home, a purpose. You have given me your laughter and your love, and those are the greatest gifts anyone could receive. I would learn 1,000 languages if it meant I could spend my life with you. Zafia was crying, and so were most of the women in the room and a few of the men. She responded in Polish, her voice thick with emotion. When I came to America, I thought I had lost everything. My husband was dead. I was alone in a strange country, unable to speak to anyone. But you saw me, Adam. You really saw me when I felt invisible to everyone else. You learned my language not just to communicate with me, but to understand me, to know my heart. You gave me back my laughter when I thought I would never laugh again. You gave me a new life, a new family, a new beginning. I love you more today than I did 30 years ago, and I will love you until my last breath. They kissed while everyone applauded, and the celebration continued long into the night. The years continued to be kind to them. They aged together, their hair turning completely white, their movements slower but their love undiminished. They celebrated the births of more grandchildren, then great-grandchildren. Their family tree grew and branched, spreading across Wyoming and beyond. Adam and Zafia remained in the house he had built for her so many years ago. It had been expanded and improved over the decades, but the core of it was still the same, still the structure he had raised with his own hands while dreaming of their future. When Adam was 72 years old, he and Zafia were sitting on the porch on a warm summer evening. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and red. Their great-grandson was playing in the yard, chasing chickens and laughing. "Do you remember when that was Peter?" Zafia asked, watching the child. "When our son was that small." "I remember everything," Adam said, reaching for her hand. "I remember every moment we have shared." "We have had a good life," Zafia said contentedly. "The best life," Adam agreed. "No regrets." "Only one," Zafia said, and Adam looked at her in surprise. She smiled at him. "I wish I had met you sooner, so we could have had even more years together." Adam squeezed her hand. "We have had plenty of years, and we have years yet to come. I am not going anywhere, and neither are you. We are too stubborn to let something like age slow us down." Zafia laughed, that same beautiful laugh he had worked so hard to hear again all those years ago. "Yes, we are very stubborn. It is one of our best qualities." They sat together as the sun sank below the horizon and the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Inside the house, they could hear their family moving about, the sounds of dinner being prepared, children laughing, the normal pleasant chaos of a large family gathering. "I am grateful," Zafia said softly in Polish, "for all of it, for every moment." "So am I," Adam replied in the same language, the language that had brought them together and that still bound them after all these years. "So am I." As full darkness fell, they finally rose from their chairs and went inside to join their family for dinner. The house was full of noise and warmth and love. 3 generations gathered around the table that Adam had built and Zafia had polished smooth with decades of use. Before they sat down to eat, young Peter, now a middle-aged man himself with silver in his hair, stood and raised his glass. "To my parents," he said in Polish, then repeated in English. "To the strongest, most loving people I have ever known, thank you for building this family, this ranch, this life. Thank you for showing us what real love looks like." Everyone raised their glasses, echoing the toast, and Adam and Zafia looked at each other with eyes full of emotion and understanding. They had started with nothing but grief and loneliness, and the determination to connect across a language barrier. They had built an empire of love from those humble beginnings. As they ate and talked and laughed with their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, Adam and Zafia knew they had achieved something rare and precious. They had found each other against all odds, had learned to speak each other's languages, both literally and figuratively, and had created a legacy that would outlast them both. The immigrant widow who had once spoken only her native tongue, and the cowboy who had learned it to hear her laugh again, had proven that love could transcend any barrier, overcome any obstacle, and build something beautiful and lasting. Their story would be told and retold by their descendants for generations, a testament to the power of determination, compassion, and the simple act of truly listening to another person's heart. It was a story of loss transformed into hope, of grief giving way to joy, of two people from different worlds creating a new world together. And every time the story was told, it would end the same way, with laughter, with love, and with the knowledge that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with a single decision to see another person, really see them, and to do whatever it takes to understand their heart. Adam and Zafia lived many more years together, each day a gift they cherished. They remained in their home, surrounded by the family they had created, until the end of their days. When death finally came for them, it came gently, and it came to both of them within a year of each other, as if neither could bear to be separated for long. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking their ranch, with a single gravestone that bore inscriptions in both English and Polish. The stone was weathered now by time and wind, but family members still came to visit, bringing their children and grandchildren, telling them the story of the immigrant widow and the cowboy who learned her language. The ranch still operated, run by their descendants, a living testament to what Adam and Zafia had built. The house still stood, expanded several times but with the original 3 rooms preserved like a shrine to where it all began. And sometimes, on quiet summer evenings when the wind blew just right through the aspen trees, people swore they could hear laughter carried on the breeze, the sound of 2 voices speaking in Polish, forever intertwined, forever together, forever home.